Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Metzia Daf Hey Amud Aleph. Today's Daf Yomi was sponsored in honor of the brave Chayalim defending Israel, protecting Israel. Today's Daf Yomi is dedicated for Yeshua, for Am Yisrael, a Shmira for the Chayalim, Hatzalah for the Shvuyim. The Gemara has been discussing two statements of Rebbe Chia Kamaisa, Rebbe Chia Basraisa. The first statement and the second statement. The first statement of Rebbe Chia was that even though we have a principle of Bava Metzia, a partial admission, that if somebody asks somebody, says somebody you owe me $100, a person admits to 50, he has to take an oath. Mechia comes along and says not only if he makes a partial admission, but even if witnesses are the ones who testify to the partial part, meaning witnesses say you owe half that money, Mechia says you also have to take an oath. That's the first statement of Rebbe Chia. And the second statement of Rebbe Chia, which is known as Rebbe Chia Basraisa, that's to teach us a different chiddush. That's to teach us the chiddush of Halech, that if a person comes along and makes a claim, the Tovea makes a claim, says you owe $100, and the Nitba says, no, I only owe 50, but here it is in front of you, and he pays it. Rebbe Chia says you're chayiv to take an oath there, because that's the classic case of a partial admission. But Reb Sheishis there says it's pater because he's exempt from an oath because he's basically denied everything. He's paid it back and he says, you owe me 50. But he says, no, I don't owe you. He's denying the entire claim that's still outstanding on him. That's the case of Halech. So Gemara on top of Hey Amud Aleph continues its discussion of this sugya. It says, Amar Halech Pater. According to Rish Lakish, it says Halech is exempt. Why do we need a pasuk, which the Gemara in Shuas tells us? We have a verse to tell us that you don't take an oath on real estate. Why do you need an oath to tell us? Why do you need a verse to tell us that if you don't swear on real estate? Every real estate is right there. If you partially admit it about the real estate, it's right there. And so you obviously, if you say that you don't take an oath on halach, you would never take an oath on real estate. That's a question on Rav Sheishis, because why would we need the pasuk? So Rav Sheishis would respond, I'll tell you why you need a pasuk. Sometimes, even though it's real estate, it's not right there because he ruined the real estate. He dug ditches in the real estate. And so therefore, you can't just pay it back exactly what was owed to you. Or inami, or alternatively, there's another case where even though it's real estate, you'd have to take an oath. Let's say the guy made a claim against him for both utensils and also real estate. Vahoda bekalim the kafir bekarkos, and he admitted to the utensils, but he denied the real estate. And so therefore, since the utensils is what he's admitting to, but that might not be extant, and the real estate is what he's denying, you would think that he has to do a Bava Metzia oath, a partial admission oath. So we say, no, you don't take an oath on real estate. So now the Gemara says, well, let's try and bring a proof for Rebbe Chia that Halech is chayev. Let's try and bring a proof for that case. How are we going to bring that? From the following scenario. Tashma, the Tani Rami Bar Chama, Arba Shomrin. We know that there are 4 watchmen, the 4 people who are in charge of protecting. And who are these 4 watchmen? Shomer Chinam, watchman for free, Sachar, hired, Nosi Sachar, renter, and Shol, the borrower. So these 4 Shomrin, in order for them to take a Shvuas Shomrim, an oath, we know that they need to do tzrichin kfir b'miktas voda b'miktas. There needs to be a partial admission, and they need to deny part of it, and they need to admit part of it. Shomer chinam v'ashol nosik sachar v'asochar. So the Gemara says that let's understand this braysa that Rami Bar Chama taught. And the braysa is, and the way we understand it is, Rav the Amarlei Halech. Are we talking about a case where he denies part of it and he says the other part is with me, and that's the partial admission? So isn't this a case of Halech? And so we see from here that you have to take an oath under these scenarios. And we're no, that's what now we're talking about. It's not necessarily a case of Halech. It could be a case as follows. Well, the Amarlei Gimel Paros Masar Tilcha. The guy claims, I gave you 3 cows. And the claimant says, all of them died through your negligence. Amrle Eo, Chada, and the first says, first of all, one of your cows, never existed. Number two, Chada, Mesa, Baones. The second cow, even though it existed, it died in an accident, and because I'm a type of shomer who is not responsible for that. V'chada, and the third, Mesa b'pshia diba'ina shlumilucha, and the third one died through my negligence that I have to pay for you. So it's not a case of helachu, delav helachu. Why? Because he's saying about one of them, it's not an existence at all, and so therefore I have nothing to pay you with. So that's not a case of helech. That's so that's not a case of helech, because he's not admitting about this cow that he claimed that it's right here in front of him. He's saying, I owe money for the cow. And so therefore he's saying, the cow that I'm denying, I owe money for, I have to take an oath. And the other cow, he's saying, is not here, because he's saying it died through negligence. So it's not that it's here that I could give it back to. It's talking about a case where it's no longer in existence. So then the Gemara says, let's go back to what we said was Reb Chia Kamaisa, the first case where the witness denied everything, but where the nitba, the guy was made a claim against, denied everything, but witnesses came and said that he's chayav. Tashma the Tani Avua the Rebbe Apatorki, the Rebbe Chia. According to Rebbe Chia Kamaisa, according to this first case, the guy says, Manoli biyadcha. He says, you owe me 100. And he says, I don't owe you anything. This is exactly the case where Rebbe says you're responsible. But here he cites a brisa. I might think he takes an oath. There's a pasuk that says, for every lost object that he says, for it is this. Meaning to say you have to take an oath for a mission by your mouth. You don't take an oath by the testimony of witnesses. So we see from here a specific brisa that you do not take an oath when the witnesses came, which is directly against what the Rebbe Chia Kamaisa taught. Gemara says that's not a question. Masnisa karamasalet. You're raising a question on Rebbe Chia from a brisa. Masnisa karamasalet Rebbe Chia. Rebbe Chia Tano. Rebbe Chia is himself as the status of a Tana. We know that Rebbe Chia was the uncle of Rav, and Rav was somebody who straddled the generations. We say about Rav in the Talmud, Rav Tana Upal. Rav himself had the ability to argue with a brisa. So Rebbe Chia was his uncle, and who was a student of Rabbi. For sure, he would have had the ability to argue with the Tana. And he says, Rebbe Chia Tana Upal. Gemara says, but he cites a verse in this brisa. Al kol avedah sher yomar ki uzeh. So Gemara explains, no, it's not a pasuk. How modem mixes atana? That verse is just to teach us a modem mixes. Vavud Rabbi Apatorki Amrocha, and the father of Rabbi Apatorki said to you. So he says that is just. So the Gemara says. Vavud Rabbi Tarki Amarlach. He'll say to you that what does he do with that pasuk? It's not to teach modem mixes. It says ksiv hu, ksiv zeh. It says who, and it says zeh. Chadal modem mixes atana. One is to teach us this case of the partial mission. V'chadal das edim the pater, and the other is to teach my law that if the witnesses testify that he's exempt. The idach, Rebbe Chia would say chadal modem mixes atana. One is to teach us to take an oath from modem mixes. V'chadal modem min atana. And the other is to teach us that you're chayav only when the claim comes from part of the Tana. Meaning to say, if you made a claim for wheat and you admitted to barley, you wouldn't be chayav to take an oath. It has to come from the minatana. The idach, whereas the father of Avud Rabbi Abtarki, how would he know this? He would learn this out. He would say, Modu minatana leisla. He doesn't accept his position that hoda, that the admission has to come from the same type of item as the claim. So, the Savoi Rabbi Gamliel, the Tanan Tanochin him Besoran Potter was Rabbi Gamliel Mechayev. So the father of Rabbi Abturki would hold like the position of Rabbi Gamliel that even though it was not the hoda was not from the same type of thing as the claim, you still have to take an oath. We have a little bit of a story here. Oh, Raya, there was a shepherd. Every day the people of the town would give him sheep to watch, or animals to watch, with the testimony, with witnesses. They did it in front of witnesses. Yom Echad, one day, Masrei below Sahadi. One day they showed it to him without the witnesses. One day they gave him the sheep to watch without the witnesses, or the goats. L'sof Amar Lahu. And then at the end of the day, they said, "Give us back our sheep." And he said to them, "Lo yudvar ma'om." He said, "What sheep? You have no witnesses, and you didn't give me any sheep." So he says to them, "Asu Sahadi." So the witnesses came, Asidu Bey. So the witnesses came, and they testified against him, the Achal Tarati Minao, that he had in fact ate two of the sheep, and he has to return them. So what's the halacha about these shepherds? So Amar Rabbi Zeram Isod Rabbi Chia Kamaisa. Rabbi Zera says, if we have this position of Rabbi Chia Kamaisa, who says that you take an oath, then Mishtaba Ashara, then this is a case of motive miktas, because like Rabbi Chia Kamaisa says, where there are witnesses, you have to take an oath. And so if we agree with Rabbi Chia Kamaisa, you'd have to take an oath. So Amar Abayam Isa, if you would agree with Rabbi Chia Mishtaba, that you take an oath, why? Isn't he considered a robber? And how could you ever trust a robber on an oath? Meaning to say, with Rabbi Chia, how would he tell him to take an oath? Would Rabbi Chia say? So would Rabbi Chia really say this position in the case of a robber where the person is suspected? So the Gemara says, no, that what did Rav Zera mean? What did Rabbi Zera mean? I didn't mean that he would take the oath, that the shepherd would take the oath. If an oath falls upon him, then the people who make the claim, then we push the claim again to the people who make the claim against him, and they're the ones who take the oath and take their money. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, says Abaye, Hashanami the Rabbi Chia. Well, if that's the case, even if we don't agree with the position of Rebbe Chia, we should obligate him to take an oath. And this is what's called a shvuas heses, an oath to appease the person, to appease the claimant. Because, as it says in the Gemara in Shvuas, there's a presumption a person only makes a claim unless he has some smoke to it. So we wouldn't make this claim for nothing. The Tanan, as we learned from Rav Nachman, if a guy says you owe me $100, and he completely denies it, Potter, he's exempt from a biblical oath. Amar Rav Nachman says, we make him take an oath anyway. We make the guy take it, even though he completely denied it, we make him take an oath, because otherwise the other person is going to be furious. So we make him take an oath anyway. So the Gemara explains, so in this case, we wouldn't make him take an oath. Why? The Rav Nachman takanti, because this whole concept of Rav Nachman is a takana. The whole idea of Rav Nachman that of a shvuas esses is a takana, because midiaraisa, biblically speaking, we don't make him take an oath. And now on top of Hammer Bays, v'takanta lo avdinan. So Rav Nachman's idea of a shvuas esses is a takana, and then there's another idea that if the guy is not able to take the oath, we push it onto the other person. So in this case, a takana for a takana, we don't do. This whole idea that if one person can't take the oath, you push it onto the claimant to take the oath, that's also a takana. So we don't make a takana on a takana. So the whole idea that we would want these shepherds to take an oath, if it was only a shvuas esses, we wouldn't push it onto the claimant if they can't take the oath. Mar says with tepaklei, but alternatively, we have another reason why he can't take an oath. Davile Roa, he's a shepherd. Amar Yehuda. Stam Roa Apostle, a shepherd. Why is the Gemara's basic question now is questioning Abaye. Abaye says he can't take an oath because he's a robber, because we suspect we have these witnesses saying he stole. But anyway, he would be disqualified to take an oath. Even we don't have the witnesses that he's a robber because he's a shepherd. And Rav Yehuda says, Stam roa apostle. That a basic shepherd is disqualified to be a witness because, as a baseline, a robber, the shepherd is somebody who's a robber because he grazes his animals in the fields of others. Gemara says, well, Kasha, this is not difficult. Why? Hadi day, hada alma. Gemara says it's not difficult because when do we say that you don't trust the shepherd? If he's watching his own sheep. But if he's watching other people's sheep, then we will trust him that he's not necessarily a robber. Because if you wouldn't say that, how would we ever be able to give our sheep to the shepherd to watch? If the shepherd is also a robber when it comes to watching other people's sheep and he grazes them also in other people's properties, then how can we ever give our sheep to the shepherds? It says you can't put a stumbling block before a blind person and you're causing him to steal or you're inciting him to steal. So the Gemara says, therefore we say, a person, we have a presumption, person will not sin if he doesn't get some sort of benefit from it. So he's not going, even though a shepherd will have a proclivity to steal when it comes to grazing his sheep in other people's property, that's only as it relates to his own sheep, but he's not going to steal so that your sheep can be fed. So that's the reason why we could give the sheep to the shepherds. This idea, take out this phrase, chazaka, presumption, ein adam chotev, lo, a person only sins when it's for him. This is a powerful spiritual concept. The phrase is, why does a person sin? Because it's for himself. A sin comes from a place of arrogance. Sin comes from a place of arrogance. Okay. So now we said in our Mishnah that each one will take, if two people grab a hold of the talents, each one will take an oath that they don't have less than a pruta, that they don't have less than half of it. And then they get to take half of it. Gemara asks the question, are the Islam Mishtaba, do they each swear that they have half, or are the Islam Mishtaba, or do they each swear that they don't have less than half? So Gemara says, Amar Funa, the Amar, what he says is, Shvu sheyeshli ba. Excuse me. What he says is the following. He says, an oath that I have something in it, that I own a part of it, but I don't have less than half. That's what he has to say. Gemara says, well, why doesn't he take an oath that it's all mine? Gemara says, no, that's not going to work, because even after he takes the oath, we're not going to give him the whole thing. We're not going to give him the whole thing, so we don't want him to take that oath. Gemara says, well, why doesn't he take an oath that it's half mine? The Gemara says, well, then he's contradicting what he said initially, because initially he claimed, and it's all his. The Gemara says, well, now also he's contradicting what he says, because he said it's all mine, and now he's saying, I have taken an oath that it's not less than half mine. So the Gemara says, Damar Kula Shali, because at first he said it's all mine. So this is what he says. He says, he claims it's all mine, and then he says, and according to your understanding, Shvua Sheyeshli Ba, take an oath that I own a part of it, the Eli Ba Pachos Mechatzev, and I don't own less than half. Mar says, Shezet Tafos Va'omed, Vizet Tafos Va'omed. So if each one owns half of it, or if each one is holding half of it, Shvua Zulama. Then why do they need to take this oath? What's the point of the oath? We'll let them just each take their half and leave. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shvua zu takanas chachamim. This oath is an obligation of the sages. We don't want everybody to just walk around and start grabbing the other person's coat. Yeah, so therefore, for that reason, we say take an oath that it's, we make them take an oath. The Gemara says, V'neima, well, why don't we say, so again, what's the reason for this oath? Gemara says, V'neima, migu dechashid amemona chashid nami hashvua. Why don't we say that since it's suspected, about money, since we suspected about money, that we suspect that he's just going to be stealing this money, taking this coat, even though it's not his, that we're not going to believe his oath. Why don't we establish the principle? If we're not going to believe him that it's his property, we think he maybe just stuck around and that's why we make him take an oath, because he just stuck his hand in to take it. Well, why don't we also suspect him that he's going to lie about the oath? Gemara says, no, we don't say, we don't say that just because he's suspected about making a false claim about money, he's also suspected about an oath. Because if we wouldn't say that, we don't say that. The whole idea that the Torah says that if you partially admit to a claim, you have to take an oath. There too, we would say, we would say, well, there too, we would say, since you're suspected about money, we shouldn't believe you about an oath. Where it says, no, that case is different. Why? There he's not lying because he's proclivity to lie, to swear falsely, but there he's just trying to delay the matter. He's just trying to push off the matter like Rabbah taught. Like Rabbah taught, and we had this teaching earlier. He says, I'm just going to push off the money until I have my money back, and then I'll repay it. And so the Gemara says, and the proof for this is that if it's that he says, if you deny a loan, you're still kosher to be a witness, because we assume that you're not necessarily a habitual liar. It's just that in this specific case, you were trying to delay the matter until you got the money back. But because don't puzzle this, but if it would be a deposit where you have in your possession and you don't have that excuse, then you would be disqualified. The Gemara says, well, if that's the case, now which Rami Barchama taught on Amar Aleph that the 4 Shomrin, they need to have a rejection of part of it and admission of part of it. Why do we believe their oath there? There, why do we believe his oath? There, in that case, why don't we say, since he has the deposit in his possession, since he's suspected about the money, he would also be suspected about the oath. Mar says, no, there too, actually, what we have to say is, there too, he's just trying to delay the matter. Savar is in the position, he says, listen, I'm responsible because it was stolen from me, and I'm a shomer sachar. So he says, maybe I'll find the thief, and I'll grab a hold of it and I'll return it. Or it slipped away and I was responsible for that. And I'm going to go and find it by the swamp and I'll bring it to him. Murray says, well, if that's the case, well, then why did Rabbi Barchama teach that if somebody's disqualified for a witness, for a deposit, if he denies a deposit, he's disqualified to be a witness? Why don't we say why don't we say that he's just delaying? Why don't we say he's just delaying until I'll search for the deposit and I'll be able to find it? So the Gemara says, okay, you're right. When we say that somebody denies the deposit is disqualified to be a witness, that's going to asu sadi v'asidibay that he shai to isol pekadam the base. So that's where witnesses come and say, you have this right now in your house, and so therefore, and he knows about this, and even though he knew it was in his house, he still denied about it. Or inami, or alternatively, davin nakale biyade, or he specifically is holding it. So therefore, he's a liar. He's a habitual liar. That's why he's disqualified to be a witness. Ella, so the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, so the Gemara says, I'll bring you another proof that somebody who's suspected about money is not suspected about an oath. The Gemara says, I'll prove to you from that which Rav Huna taught. That which Rav Huna taught. It says that we make him take an oath that it's not in his domain. Nema, that what's this case talking about? So this is talking about a case that if a shomer sachar or chinam, if you ask him, the guy makes a claim for his deposit, and the animal went missing, but he doesn't want to take an oath, and he's ready to pay in exchange for it. But still, at that point, we make him take an oath that it's not in his possession, rabbinically, because we're concerned that maybe he said, oh, I like this deposit a lot, and he wants to buy it in this manner. So why don't we say there, why don't we say there that since he's suspected about money, he's suspected about his shvuah? So from the fact we don't say that, we see you don't say that if you're suspected about money, you're suspected about an oath. The Gemara says, no, hasam nami, Mora the Amar Demei Kayahiv no. No, there the guy he'll say he'll be more active for himself. He'll make up an excuse why he can lie, because he'll say, I'm giving money for it, so I'm allowed to say this non-truth. I'm aware of midifto Ravina. So, but we have a different problem. He should be anyways disqualified from taking an oath because he's violating the prohibition of lo tachmod, because he's taking this deposit, which he said is high upon. The prohibition of lo tachmod is do not covet. And as Rashi says, lo tachmod, lo tig. So what do we care if he's in violation of do not covet or do not steal? Lo tachmod is a prohibition. And so why don't we say, since he's suspected about the prohibition of lo tachmod, he's also suspected about taking an oath. So the Gemara says, no, Amar Ravacha midifto Ravina, Valka Avar alo tachmod. The Gemara says, lo tachmod, inchi below dmei mashmo. So the Gemara says, the prohibition of lo tachmod, inchi below dmei mashmo. That implies that he's violating it only when he desires it without paying for it. But when he pays for it, then people don't think he's in violation of this prohibition of lo tachmod. People don't think that they're in violation of any prohibition. People just think that they're in violation of the prohibition when they don't pay for it. But when they pay for it, they say, oh, I bought it. And so therefore, he's not going to be suspected about an oath. Gemara says, well, if that's the case, we'll bring another proof to this idea. But this other proof will have to wait for tomorrow's daf. Yesh koach.